I've been a grant writer and I understand what it takes to write a successful grant. I found that having everything in place that grants ask for is over half the battle. This means knowing who your organization is, who you serve, and how you provide services. You've probably heard the term grant ready before, but what is it and how do you get there? So let's address the basics first. What is being grant ready? Well, being grant ready is the process where an organization assesses, plans for, and executes their plan to research, find, apply for, win, and manage a grant successfully. There are 4 areas of the organization's infrastructure you will focus on to be grant ready. They are organizational, operational, financial, and programs. So let's talk about the 4 areas specifically. So first, organizational. Organizational means you are a recognized company in your state with articles of incorporation and have your 501c3 tax exempt status. You will have a mission statement and a strategic plan. I have a training on these in Nonprofit Founders University if you need to know more. Your board is also critical to grant readiness. Foundations are investing in your organization and want to know the board is committed to the organization. Now, here are 5 characteristics foundations look for in boards. Be active and meet monthly. Now, some of you may be saying, but we don't meet monthly. That's not in our bylaws. That's okay. Whatever your bylaws say, as long as it's regular and you are keeping track of when you're meeting and you have your meeting minutes. That's what's going to be most important. Number 2, take the lead on fundraising and connect the organization with donors and funders. So what does this mean? Well, board members have to lead when it comes to fundraising. If they aren't leading, then they really can't ask anyone else to follow, right? And they need to be connecting the organization with donors and funders. So what does that mean? They need to be introducing your organization to potential donors and funders. So what's an example? Well, let me tell you. I was in an organization once where one of our board members had a regular Saturday golf meeting with one of the board members of a foundation we were trying to get into. It was a normal, everyday Saturday for them to get together and play golf. So that was one of those examples where we had to ask the board member, hey, do you think you could talk about this a little bit? Ask the board member about this while you're playing golf? Because we're really trying to get into this particular foundation. We really need this particular grant. That's what I'm talking about. Number 3 is diverse in expertise and ethnicity who mirrors your target population. So you want your board to be diverse in not only expertise, but also your board needs to mirror the ethnicity of your target population. If you have a program for, say, people who are Hispanic, you need board members who have a Hispanic background, who live in the Hispanic community, that understand that target population like no other. Next, a board has committees. Believe it or not, there are foundations that look for boards with committees. what it says is that there is a structure, an organization to the board, and that there are certain things the board has deemed an area of focus. And so that's why you normally create a committee. And last, foundations look for boards who invest their time and money. It's called participation. Many foundations will ask what the percentage of participation is for each board member. So they need to be investing time and money. And think about it. They are the leaders of the group or of the organization. They need to be leading by example here. All right, let's move on to operational. Operational means the day-to-day activities of the nonprofit. So, do you have processes and systems in place to handle money? Do you have policies and procedures? Are you partnering with other organizations to further your mission? These are things that foundations are going to look for. Next, financial. Financial means how your organization complies with federal rules and receives income. So here's a list of items that you would need before you write your grant. A budget for the overall organization. Now, this is also referred to as an operational budget, a general operational budget, a general operating budget, or just simply Gen Ops. No matter what you call it, this is the budget for the entire organization. And it should be something that you have right now. Next, a fundraising plan. Now, a fundraising plan shows the funder or the foundation, or whoever is making this grant, that you have other sources of income and that you can sustain your operations. Now, this is very important because funders don't want to be the sole funder, just like a founder does not want to be the sole funder. A foundation or any funder does not want to do that either. So, a fundraising plan will answer the question on the grants, how do you plan on sustaining this? That's usually a question. You go to your fundraising plan and you pull out all the different ways that you're going to sustain it. Next is your 990 or 990EZ. This is a document you will have to turn in just about every time you apply for a grant. I can't remember a time I didn't have to submit a 990 or the 990EZ. Next, an audit or independent accounting review. If your nonprofit has a budget less than $250,000, you will be asked for an independent accounting review. An audit is if you have more than $250,000. Usually it's asked that you have an audit, but for a lot of funders, if you have that budget threshold, you can ask them and they will accept an independent accounting review instead. Next, you need a money handling policy. Can't stress how important that is. You need to have something in writing that says when we get the money, this is the process it goes to in order to get to the bank. Next, you're going to need the board members' financial participation. This is something that gets asked more often than you would think. And so you need to have some way of keeping track of how much financial participation in a percentage that each board member is doing. All right, moving on to programs. Foundations want to invest in projects that have the greatest impact on the communities that they serve. So the best way to show an impact in your community is to have a program. I go into detail in a blog post, develop a grant-ready program and a free worksheet, and lay out a complete program that is grant-ready in my book. I have my 501c3. Now what? Your blueprint to starting your nonprofit without being the sole funder. You can also find more resources on program development in my free Facebook group, the Nonprofit Founders Club. So, let's talk about some of the documents now that you're going to need. So first, you will need your organization's IRS 501c3 determination letter. Any registration certification required by your state, organizational budget, current and upcoming fiscal years is optimal. Your audited financial statements, the last 2 years if available, and like I said earlier, some foundations will take an independent accounting review if your budget is under $250,000. Most recent IRS Form 990, you will need that. You will need a list of board of directors with their names, affiliations, and responsibilities. Next, documentation of support from your board of directors. So again, that can be what percentage of your board contributes funds to support the organization. Ideally, you want 100% participation. And often foundations will ask for the board list and ask that the board of directors support is noted on the list. So basically, you have that list where you have the name, affiliations, responsibilities. A lot of times it will have their contact information, address, phone number, email, and then they'll ask you to add a column that says participation percent, and then you have to put down what kind of percentage that they participate. Then you have your organizational chart. You'll be asked from time to time about an organizational chart. Newsletters, if you have any available, any published articles highlighting your organization, if available, and a criteria for board selection. So yes, you need a vetting process and you need it in writing. I have a comprehensive grant process readiness checklist for download, so I'll put the link in the episode description or notes. So, moving on, why would we want to be grant ready? So taking the time to be grant ready will ensure higher odds of receiving grant awards. The most seasoned grant writers in grant ready organizations report a benchmark of 1 in 10 grants receive awards for their organizations. This means an organization that isn't ready has less than a 1 in 10 chance of seeing a grant award. I want you to hear that. Organizations that aren't grant ready have a less than 1 in 10 chance of seeing a grant award. That's why it's so important. The nonprofits who are grant ready demonstrate that they are a good investment. See, foundations want to know that you are making, or that they are making, good investments in the community through your nonprofit. Having your ducks in a row and a track record of impact, you become a less risky investment. So let's now talk about when grants aren't the answer. If time is a factor, grants aren't the answer. So what do I mean? Well, you need funding now. Well, why is that? Time is a factor. You need funding now. Grants take 3 to 6 months to notify you if you are awarded the grant or not. So let me explain the process that a grant goes through so that you can understand why it takes so long. So you've written the grant, you've submitted the grant, it's all before the deadline. Well, they have to wait for the deadline to be able to start processing all of the grants that come in. Now, mind you, there can be 75 grants, 150 grants, 2,000 grants that come in. It all depends. And so they start at deadline date processing the grants. And usually the first round is the technical round. What that means is they go through every single grant and they look and they see, were the margins right? Is the font right? Is the font size right? We said we needed 1 page in this section. Is it a page? Is it more than a page? And so that's the technical stuff. They go through, and usually round 1, usually round 1, they say, if it doesn't meet our technical requirements, it's out. We're not even going to look at it. We're not going to look at the content. Then, if you are technically sound, you move to round 2. And round 2 usually has a committee of grant reviewers who then take the grant, and each one of the grant reviewers is typically assigned 1 section of the grant. They are given a sheet of paper, usually with a system on rating their section. So they'll have a list of questions, and it's like, rate it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Score it however. You have no idea what those questions are usually. And so you don't have a clue how that's going to go. But they sit down and they take their section, they read through it, and they score it. Then what happens is all of the scores are put together into a larger score. Sometimes grants are awarded at that point. Sometimes it goes to round 3. So what happens is they may say, okay, we're only going to look at the top 5 or 10 grants. So the top 5 or 10 grant scores moves on to round 3. Everyone else is out. And so at that point, they may be calling you to check on some details. They may be doing a site visit. They could be doing all kinds of other things to narrow down who is going to get. Because what happens is they have a set amount of money that they have to give away. And so they are looking at all of the grant proposals and trying to figure out how to fund as many of them as possible. So that also means you may not get the whole amount. You may only get a portion of what you ask for. Once they have decided on who's getting the grants, then they notify the organization, usually through the mail. Sometimes if it's through a portal, they'll do that. But they will notify you that you've got the grant, and then your time starts. So that's the process. And that's why it takes so long, because it's not just your grant. I mean, they've got hundreds probably, if not thousands, that they're having to go through. All right, now, if your project will take more than a year to complete, grants aren't going to be for you. The reason is that grants are typically awarded for a year at a time. And if you don't spend the money during that grant cycle, you will be responsible to repay the unused funds. So you want to make sure you're able to use all of the funds within that grant time frame. And like I said, typically that's a year. So if what you want to do is going to take more than a year to complete, you might want to rethink that grant. Next, you need the project completed before a grant cycle begins. So under these circumstances, grants aren't going to help. They are paid for expenses during the grant awarded time frame. Now, the time after the organization has been notified of the award to the end of the grant cycle is usually your grant time frame. So the total time frame is typically a year unless you are specifically awarded a multi-year grant. Funding will not be provided before the grant time frame has begun. A little side note here. This is one of the big reasons why grant writers aren't paid after you get a grant. That's because grants aren't going to pay for something that has already been done, service that has already been rendered. It's only going to pay for what's included in the grant time frame that's in your budget in your grant. All right, let's move on. Grants aren't the answer if you don't have a funding strategy. Now, a funding strategy is typically found in a fundraising plan. If you have a fundraising plan, you are good. If you don't, get one. Because this means you have multiple means of funding your nonprofit. I'm going to say it again. Funders don't like to be the sole funder. And so if you're asking them to be the sole funder, they're probably going to pass. So have a funding strategy. Next, you don't have a formal program established. Programs are most often funded, at least partially, because they make the most visible impact. This makes programs the easiest project to receive a grant for. So, use the program development template to help you formalize your program. And that template is in the notes. Grants can be a very good thing for your nonprofit. I don't want you to get me wrong here. When they are part of your funding strategy, they are awesome. When you are ready for grants, they are awesome. But they can be very detrimental before that time. So they are a very good thing when they can help you get projects completed or infuse funding into your program. You know, most new nonprofits aren't grant ready and have work to do to get ready in the 4 focus areas grants ask for: organizational, operational, financial, and programs. Grants aren't right for every situation, so knowing when pursuing grants is a good use of your time and when it's not keeps you focused on the right things in your nonprofit. Okay, that's all for this episode. Take a look at the description for the resources mentioned in this episode.